When we talk about the history of human space exploration, we almost always default to the hardware. We fetishize the engineering. We talk about the thrust of the rockets, the tensile strength of the alloys, the orbital mechanics of the rendezvous. We look at the machine, and we marvel at how it conquers the void. But there is a parallel, and arguably more consequential narrative. It's the story of the biological and psychological metamorphosis of the human inside that machine. In this deep dive, we are dissecting the case of Captain Sunita, Suni Williams. We are looking at her not just as a pilot, but as a data point, a transitional figure in the speciation of Homo sapiens towards something else, something we might call Homo cosmicus. I will dive into Suni's experience as a naval officer, then her early space missions, followed by the infamous Starliner anomaly, and then go into detail about the biologic effects that extended stay in space had on Captain Williams, along with her scientific contributions to biology, and end with the physical rehab she has had to endure since returning to Earth.
Welcome to Dr. Evolution's Toolbox. As a medical doctor and synthetic biologist, this podcast is where I share tools we are using to build a better world with biology. As a disclaimer, nothing I say should be considered medical advice. This information is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and these are my views alone and do not necessarily reflect the views of my employer.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and lift off.
Before we can understand how Williams survived a 286-day unplanned marathon in orbit during the Starliner crisis of 2024, we have to rewind. We have to look at the clay before it was fired in the kiln. We have to understand that the astronaut isn't made on the launch pad. The astronaut is forged in the terrestrial crucible we call Earth. To understand Sunita Williams, you have to look at the water before you look at the sky. Williams was born in 1965 in Ohio, the daughter of a neuroanatomist. That's a telling detail. She grew up in a house where the mechanics of the brain and the body were dinner table conversation. But her true biological conditioning began at the U.S. Naval Academy, specifically in her role as a basic diving officer. Now, scientifically, diving is the closest terrestrial analog we have to spaceflight. It's not just about floating. It's about the management of a hostile environment where your survival is entirely dependent on a mechanical life support loop. When you are deep underwater, your brain has to rewire itself to process movement in 3 dimensions. Up and down become just as relevant as left and right. But more importantly, diving teaches you the discipline of pressure. Williams learned early on that panic is a death sentence. If your regulator fails, you don't bolt for the surface. That could kill you. You solve the problem right there, in the dark, under the weight of the ocean. This was the first layer of her psychological armor. From the ocean, she transitioned to the air, but not to the stable, gliding flight of fixed-wing jets. She chose helicopters, the CH-53 Sea Stallion, the H-46 Sea Knight. Aerodynamically, a helicopter is a chaotic system. A plane wants to fly. A helicopter requires constant, aggressive negotiation with gravity to keep from falling out of the sky. It is inherently unstable. Flying these machines honed Williams' psychomotor skills to a razor's edge. It required a constant feedback loop between hand, eye, and inner ear. By 1993, she was at the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. This is where the test pilot mindset is really codified. A test pilot doesn't just operate machinery, they diagnose it while it is actively failing. They learn to compartmentalize fear and replace it with data acquisition. When the alarm screams, the heart rate must stay low. This is the exact neural pathway Williams would rely on 30 years later when the Starliner thrusters began to fail as she approached the ISS. She didn't panic, she piloted. But the final piece of this terrestrial puzzle, the thing that perhaps saved her sanity during those long, uncertain months in 2024, was an experiment called NEEMO 2. After being selected by NASA in 1998, Williams spent 9 days living underwater in the Aquarius habitat. This is what we call saturation diving. The nitrogen in your body saturates your tissues to match the surrounding pressure. The psychological implication of this is profound. In saturation diving, you are effectively on a different planet. You cannot just open the hatch and swim up to the sunlight. If you did, the decompression sickness would be fatal. You are isolated, you are confined, and most importantly, you are subject to delayed gratification survival. Williams learned physically and mentally, but the way out is not immediate. You have to wait, you have to endure. That experience wired her neural pathways for patience. It taught her how to live in a capsule where the outside world is deadly and the return trip is not guaranteed. So by the time Sunita Williams strapped into the Space Shuttle Discovery for the first time in 2006, she wasn't just a rookie astronaut. She was a biological instrument calibrated by deep water, unstable aerodynamics, and the psychological rigors of saturation diving. She was already an evolutionary, she just hadn't left the atmosphere yet. Next, we light the candle. We follow Williams to the International Space Station for expeditions 14 and 15, where she establishes her biological baseline, battles the metabolic tax of spacewalking, and runs her first marathon in the void.
This podcast is supported by Brain.fm. Between studying medicine, reading patient charts, analyzing hundreds of articles, and preparing for flight test, my ability to focus is my superpower. But in today's world, entering that flow state can feel impossible. That is why I was excited to find Brain.fm. Their evidence-based, neuroscience-engineered music locks me in. They have several peer-reviewed articles funded by the National Science Foundation to back their results. If you're trying to build a better world with biology, why not use science to improve your life? You can start for free with a 30-day trial by using the link in the show notes. Now back to the show.
I am used to the space station. The space station is sort of like a second home. So my first time up there, I'm looking at it up on the wall. That's why I'm looking at this. I'm trying to think of what was scary. But my first time there, when I was in the forward part of the space station, living there by myself with my two other Russian colleagues in the way back, yeah, I got scared a little bit because first time I'm like very hypersensitive to all of these switching of pumps and fans and noises. One antenna right outside there was a crew quarters there, would turn every now and then at night, or I think it was a camera actually. And sometimes the folks in mission control would turn it so they could see stuff. And it was like right outside the window so we could hear inside. So I was asking a lot of questions during that flight, like, what's that? What's that? What's that? But now that I've lived there for a long time, I feel like I know most of the things that are happening, or I can figure it out.
To understand the anomaly, we first have to understand the baseline. In scientific inquiry, you cannot measure deviation until you have established a standard, a control group of one. For Captain Sunita Williams, that baseline was established during expeditions 14 and 15 aboard the International Space Station between 2006 and 2007. If her early life in the Navy was about forging the steel, this period was about stress testing it. We often romanticize the image of the astronaut. We see the slow motion flips, the floating droplets of water, the serene view of the blue marble. But my job is to look at the medical charts. And when you strip away the romance, spaceflight is an act of physiological violence. And nowhere is that violence more apparent than during an EVA, extravehicular activity. During this first long-duration mission, Williams performed 4 spacewalks, totaling over 29 hours in the vacuum. Now, the public perception of a spacewalk is that it's effortless. You're floating, after all. But biologically, it is a marathon of anaerobic endurance. Inside the suit, the pressure is fighting you. Every inch of movement requires force. Imagine squeezing a tennis ball as hard as you can. Now imagine doing that continuously for 6 hours. That is the reality of working with pressurized gloves. The forearms burn, the fingernails often bruise or detach, and the metabolic cost is astronomical. There was a moment during one of these walks that highlighted the mental tax of this environment. A camera became untethered. In Earth gravity, it would have fallen to the floor. In orbit, it simply floated away. A slow, silent reminder of the unforgiving physics of the void. Williams watched it drift. It was a minor equipment loss, but physiologically, these moments trigger a cortisol spike, a state of hypervigilance that the astronaut must maintain for hours. Williams didn't just survive this environment, she mastered it, setting what was then the record for the most spacewalking time by a woman. But the true test of her biological baseline came on April 16, 2007. While thousands of runners were lining up in Hopkinton for the Boston Marathon, Williams strapped herself into the Colbert treadmill on the ISS to run the first marathon in space. This wasn't a PR stunt, it was a significant data point in aerospace medicine. Running on Earth is a conversation between your feet and the ground. gravity pulls you down, you push back. In space, you have to fake that gravity. Williams wore a harness system that used bungees to pull her shoulders and hips toward the tread. It's a brutal setup. The harness chafes. It digs into the hips, causing deep bruising. It places a vertical load on the spine that feels unnatural because the rest of the body is weightless. Then there is the issue of heat. This is something we rarely think about. On Earth, when you run, the air moves past you. Convection cools your skin. In the stagnant air of a spacecraft module, convection doesn't exist. Sweat doesn't drip, it pools. It creates a gelatinous layer of water on the skin that traps heat inside the body. Williams had to manage this thermoregulatory nightmare for 4 hours and 24 minutes. And consider the sensory conflict. Her eyes were telling her she was inside a stagnant metal box. Her legs were telling her she was running. Her inner ear, the vestibular system, was floating in 0G. Usually, this disconnection causes immediate vomiting. Williams, however, pushed through the proprioceptive disconnection, forcing her brain to accept a new reality. She finished the race. She finished the mission. After 195 days, she returned to Earth, her body slightly altered but largely intact. She had proven that she could withstand the harness, the radiation, and the isolation. She had established her baseline. But baselines are only useful if the variables stay constant. In 2007, Sunita Williams knew exactly when she was coming home. The shuttle Discovery was on a schedule. The timeline was fixed. She had no way of knowing that nearly 2 decades later, she would step into a new capsule, the Boeing Starliner, expecting an 8-day sprint, only to face a test that would throw every single baseline metric out the window. Let's explore the psychological fortress required to survive a mission with no end date.
Go Starliner. Godspeed, Butch and Sunny.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff of Starliner and Atlas V, carrying 2 American heroes, drawing a line to the stars for all of us.
June 5th, 2024. A date etched in the logbooks of aerospace history, not for the triumph of the launch, but for the ghost in the machine that revealed itself 24 hours later. In our last chapter, we looked at the physical baseline, the runner's heart and the diver's lungs that Sunita Williams brought to orbit. But now, we are leaving physiology behind for a moment to enter the gray matter. We are dissecting the mind. This is Chapter 3, the Starliner Anomaly. To understand the magnitude of what happened in the summer of 2024, you have to understand the mission profile. The Boeing crew flight test was designed as a sprint, a milk run. Launch, dock, check the systems, and come home in 8 days. It was a business trip. But as the Starliner capsule approached the International Space Station on June 6th, the script fell apart. 5 of the spacecraft's 28 reaction control thrusters failed. Helium leaks were detected hissing in the propulsion manifold. Williams and Commander Butch Wilmore relied on their test pilot instincts, those decades of compartmentalizing fear, to dock the vehicle manually. They made it safe to the station, but the vehicle that brought them there was effectively dead on arrival. For weeks, NASA engineers on the ground scrambled to diagnose the propulsion anomalies, but up in orbit, Williams was facing a very different kind of failure, the collapse of the timeline. In August, the call was finally made. The risk was too high. Starliner would return empty. Williams and Wilmore were no longer visitors, they were residents. The 8-day sprint had mutated into a 286-day marathon. Now, pause and consider the psychological violence of that shift. In aerospace psychology, we talk about the break-off phenomenon, a sense of detachment from Earth. Usually, astronauts manage this by anchoring themselves to a return date. It is a finish line. When you remove the finish line, you invite a state known as mission creep, which often leads to a nightmare scenario of anxiety, sleep disruption, and cognitive decline. The human brain craves certainty. Williams was handed indefinite detention in a tin can moving at 17,000 miles per hour. So why didn't she crack? Why didn't we see the psychological disintegration that simulations often predict? The answer lies in a concept called salutogenic resilience. Most people look at stress and focus on the damage, the pathology. A salutogenic approach focuses on the origins of health. Instead of viewing the delay as a prison sentence, Williams cognitively restructured the event. She didn't see herself as stuck. She reintegrated immediately as a crew member of Expedition 71. She stripped away the title of Starliner pilot, and reverted to astronaut. In her interviews from orbit during those uncertain months, you can hear this mechanism at work. She told the world, "We don't feel abandoned." She leveraged the overview effect, that profound cognitive shift that happens when you see the Earth as a single, borderless entity. She described the planet as one tiny little mudball. When you view the Earth from that vantage point, terrestrial frustrations, schedules, deadlines, politics lose their gravitational pull. Williams transformed a mechanical failure into a demonstration of supreme mental plasticity. She proved that the critical component of a long-duration mission isn't the propulsion system or the life support. It is the narrative the astronaut tells themselves. She didn't just endure the waiting game, she mastered it. But while her mind was adapting to this new extended reality, her body was beginning to pay the price. The adrenaline of the crisis had faded, and the long, slow grind of microgravity was setting in. The mind was welling, but the cells were under siege. Next, we go under the microscope. We'll explore the space-omics of her extended stay, from the fluid shifting in her skull to the unraveling of her DNA.
Hello, I'm Suni Williams. I'm up here on the International Space Station. It's like a glass-bottom boat. This is the cupola. It sticks down below the space station. It's one of those places you find yourself hanging out in all the time because all you want to do is look back at our planet. I think some questions I had were about what do you do in your free time? And you can't help but want to just come to the cupola and look outside as much as you can. And a lot of folks, I play this game with myself about where we're flying over the Earth. Try to come in here and just guess. After being here for a little while, you can sort of figure it out. You can tell different cloud types over different continents. You can tell different soil types over different continents. So let's see. And then, of course, there's a lot of ocean. So usually we're over the ocean at first glance. I will tell you in just a moment where we are. What? There we go. So right now we are right over Africa. It's a little bit cloudy, as you can tell, but we're right over the continent of Africa.
While the mind can be convinced that a week-long sprint is actually a 9-month marathon, the body is a fundamentalist. It follows the laws of physics, not intentions. And for 286 days, the physics of the International Space Station have been waging a quiet, cellular war against Captain Williams. Welcome to Chapter 4, The Body in Flux. To understand what is happening to Williams right now, you have to understand the behavior of fluids. On Earth, gravity drags your blood toward your feet. Your heart has to pump hard against that force to get oxygen to your brain. But the moment Williams entered orbit, that drag vanished. The result is a massive fluid shift. Almost 2 liters of fluid migrate from the legs to the chest and head. Astronauts call it puffy face, chicken legs, but the medical reality is far more concerning. This fluid creates intracranial pressure. It presses against the back of the eyeballs, flattening the globe and swelling the optic nerve. It's a condition called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, or SANS. Imagine the pressure of a sinus headache, but one that lasts for nearly a year and slowly reshapes the geometry of your vision. Williams isn't just looking out the window at Earth. She is likely doing so while managing a degradation in visual acuity that could become permanent. But the assault isn't limited to the eyes. We have to talk about the skeleton. The human body is ruthlessly efficient. On Earth, your skeleton is constantly engaged in a fight against gravity. Remove gravity, and the body decides that heavy bones are an unnecessary calorie expenditure. Without intervention, an astronaut will lose 1 to 2% of their bone mass every single month. The calcium literally leaches out of the bones, into the bloodstream, and is excreted. Essentially, the body attempts to dissolve its own structural integrity. To combat this, Williams isn't just exercising. She is engaged in a daily, desperate counteroffensive. She spends hours strapped to the AirRed, the advanced resistive exercise device. It's a vacuum cylinder weightlifting machine that simulates heavy squats and deadlifts. She has to trick her bones into thinking they are still carrying the weight of the world, just to prevent them from turning brittle before she hits the atmosphere on the way home. However, the most fascinating and unsettling changes are happening where we can't see them. We are talking about space-omics. This is the study of how spaceflight rewrites the genomic and metabolic code. Recent data from extended missions suggests that being in orbit creates a genomic modulation. It puts the cells in a state of alarm. We are looking at mitochondrial dysregulation. The power plants of her cells are sputtering, leading to oxidative stress and inflammation. It's as if the body is aging at an accelerated rate, yet simultaneously trying to repair itself. Perhaps the strangest paradox lies in her telomeres, the protective caps at the end of her DNA strands that usually shorten as we age. Previous studies, like the NASA twin study, showed that in space, telomeres actually get longer, only to shrink rapidly and dramatically upon re-entry. It's a biological whiplash. Because her Starliner mission morphed from a short jaunt into a near year-long residency, Williams has become an accidental yet critical data point in this field. She is providing the medical baseline for what happens to a human when a mission goes wrong on the way to Mars. She is living through a gravity shock in slow motion. Her heart has changed shape, becoming more spherical. Her immune system is confused. Her very DNA is vibrating with the stress of radiation and microgravity. Sunita Williams went up as a pilot, but as the months drag on, she is returning as something else, a biological variant of the woman who left. She is a test subject in the most extreme sense, proving whether the human body can endure the silence of deep space without breaking apart from the inside out. But while her body fought this internal battle, her hands remained busy. In the next chapter, we'll look at what she actually did up there, like space farming, manufacturing drugs, and conducting the experiments that will pave the road for the rest of us.
Hey, Aki, what are you doing down there?
Passing things.
This is one of the cool things about space, too. It sort of looks like there's a big old hole here, but you don't even think twice about it. You could just jump over the hole, or if you want, you can go jump into the hole. I'm coming down.
Come on down.
Woo! Then you can come right back up again, like Superman. Woo! We're lucky we have a really cool big space station that you can fly around in. That's actually called the PMM. You might have saw it out the window. It's a big silver canister. What's really great about that is it's essentially our closet in our pantry or whatever you want to call it. We have extra food down there. We have extra clothes. We actually throw the trash out down there. So it's nice and organized, and we have all of our stuff that we need while we're working in all these other modules all stowed in this location down here. And it's a lot of fun to play in.
In our last chapter, we looked at the toll microgravity takes on the human body. The fluid shifts, the ocular pressure, the accelerated aging. Now, we look at what Sunita Williams actually did with all that extra time. Because when the Boeing Starliner returned to Earth empty in August 2024, leaving Williams and Butch Wilmore behind, they didn't just float around the module waiting for a ride. They went to work. NASA suddenly found itself with 2 highly trained bonus crew members, and in a laboratory where astronaut time is the most expensive resource in existence, Williams transformed from a marooned test pilot into the lead scientist of an accidental Mars simulation. Over the course of her unplanned 286-day residency, Williams participated in over 150 separate investigations. But we aren't talking about middle school science fair projects here. We are talking about solving the 0 to 1 problems, the fundamental barriers that currently prevent humans from surviving on the red planet. Let's look at the most primal requirement: food. You cannot pack a lunch for a 3-year mission to Mars. The mass constraints are impossible. You have to grow your calories. Williams devoted significant hours to plant Habitat 07. Now, on Earth, gardening is a hobby. In orbit, it's a battle against physics. Without gravity, water doesn't sink into soil. It balls up and floats away, or it drowns the roots. Williams was essentially developing the agricultural protocols for deep space, tweaking hydration systems to grow tomatoes and lettuce in a hostile vacuum. Every leaf she measured was a data point for a future greenhouse on the Martian surface. But calories are only half the battle. There's also the issue of medicine. Pharmaceutical supply chains don't exist in deep space, and essential nutrients degrade over time due to radiation. This brings us to one of the most critical experiments Williams managed: rhodium biomanufacturing. The goal here is staggering in its implications. The experiment explores whether we can use bacteria and yeast to essentially brew complex pharmaceuticals and vitamins on demand in microgravity. Williams wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was acting as a biopharmacist, testing whether a crew on the way to Mars could generate their own antibiotics or nutritional supplements. If that technology matures, it severs the umbilical cord to Earth. It makes the species self-sufficient. And then there is the unglamorous, gritty reality of fluid physics. For months, Williams worked on the plumbing of survival, specifically the systems that recycle urine into drinking water. It sounds pedestrian, but when you are 40 million miles from the nearest river, water recovery efficiency is the difference between life and death. The data she gathered on fluid dynamics and life support systems during this extended stay provided engineers with a torture test of hardware that was never meant to run this hard for this long with this many people on board. This is the irony of the Starliner anomaly. The failure of the transport vehicle created the perfect conditions for a habitat success. By staying on board for nearly 10 months, Sunita Williams lived the Mars prototype. She endured the isolation, the reliance on recycled air, the psychological distance, and the necessity of scientific self-sufficiency that will define the next generation of explorers. She proved that when the ride home breaks down, the astronaut doesn't just survive, she evolves. She turned a holding pattern into a masterclass in orbital living. But as the calendar turned to 2025, the experiments had to be packed away. The science in exile was coming to an end. The SpaceX Crew 9 Dragon was docked and waiting, and while Williams had mastered the art of staying in space, she now faced the most violent physical challenge of all, the return to gravity. For our final chapter, The Return of Homo Cosmicus, we analyze the brutal physiology of re-entry, the phenomenon of walking amnesia, and how Sunita Williams' body of data has written the blueprint for the interplanetary future.
And splashdown. Crew 9 back on Earth.
An on-time splashdown. Looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Suni Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it. Some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles.
There is a popular misconception that returning from space is a moment of relief, a gentle glide back to the safety of home. But if you speak to anyone who has endured long-duration spaceflight, they will tell you the truth. Re-entry is not a return. It is a collision. For Captain Sunita Williams, coming home in March 2025 aboard the SpaceX Crew 9 Dragon wasn't just the end of an unplanned 9-month odyssey. It was the beginning of her most difficult physical challenge yet. To understand what happens when a human body slams back into the atmosphere after 286 days in microgravity, we have to look at the physics of the fall. When the capsule hits the upper atmosphere, it effectively becomes a meteor. Inside, the deceleration force is brutal. For nearly a year, Williams' heart didn't have to pump against gravity to get blood to her brain. Her neck muscles didn't have to hold up the weight of her head. Suddenly, as the Dragon creases, gravity returns, not as a friend, but as a crushing weight. A 4G load feels like an elephant sitting on your chest. And when the capsule finally splashes down, the transition is absolute. The fluid shifts that had puffed up her face and thinned her legs for months violently reverse. The blood pools in the feet. The heart has to relearn, in seconds, how to fight the pull of the Earth. But the most disorienting battle happens inside the skull. This is the phenomenon of neurovestibular dysfunction. Deep in our inner ears, tiny crystals called otoliths tell our brains which way is down. For Williams, those crystals had been floating free since June 2024. Upon splashdown, they settle, sending a chaotic storm of signals to the brain. This results in what space physicians call walking amnesia. When Williams was pulled from the capsule, her brain likely perceived the ground as tilting, the horizon rolling like a ship at sea. If she turned her head, her vision would blur, a failure of the vestibulo-ocular reflex that stabilizes our gaze. She wasn't just weak, she was sensorily decoupled from reality. For the first few days, simply standing in the shower with eyes closed could result in an immediate fall, because without visual cues, her brain had forgotten the concept of vertical. And this is where the real work of the evolutionary begins. The weeks following her return were defined by a grueling rehabilitation protocol, designed to reverse the silent violence of space, osteopenia. Despite her rigorous exercise regime on the ISS, the lack of load-bearing stress meant her bones had been shedding calcium at a rate of roughly 1 to 2% per month. Her skeleton had effectively aged decades in less than a year. The rehabilitation is a slow, painful process of high-impact resistance training and nutritional loading to convince the body to rebuild its own scaffolding. So how do we categorize Sunita Williams in the history books? It is tempting to define her by the anomaly as the pilot of the Starliner who got stuck, but that is a surface perspective. From a scientific vantage point, Williams is something far more significant. She is a transitional prototype. The data harvested from her body, the genetic markers of her accelerated aging, the ocular shifts of her vision, the plasticity of her recovery, provides the biological blueprint for the crews that will eventually live on the moon or travel to Mars. Sunita Williams demonstrated that the human organism is not fixed. It is fluid and highly adaptable. We can rewrite our vestibular logic, we can metabolize stress, and we can survive the indefinite wait. We began this deep dive looking at a young test pilot learning to fly helicopters, mastering the machine. We end it by looking at a veteran astronaut who mastered the organism. Sunita Williams didn't just survive the Starliner test flight, she bridged the gap between the human we are today and the species we must become to leave this planet. She is the proof of concept for Homo cosmicus, and while her mission has technically ended, the science she embodied will guide us for generations to come. Thank you, Suni, for your service, career, and contribution to building a better world with biology. And thank you for listening. I hope this story inspires some of you in your own missions. You have all that it takes. Please subscribe for more. Let me know what you thought of longer deep dives like this, and share this with your friends.